The Lord be with you, and a warm welcome to you as always from all of us here in Powerscourt with Kilbride. It is a warm and sheltered welcome today as I have been driven inwards yet again as we are experiencing a storm across our land when this is being recorded. We have a funeral in our church this afternoon, and I've already been across to check that the electricity is working and that our pathways are clear. Because if you've ever visited us here in Powerscourt, especially, you will note that we are surrounded by age-old pine trees. So there's always a fear in a storm that one of these will fall, and on occasion it does happen that branches come down. So wherever you are, I hope maybe by the time you're receiving this online, the storm has passed, but I hope you're safe and that you have managed to tuck yourself away until the ways are safe again for you to travel. You're welcome to join us today as we take a little piece of Luke's Gospel, which is on our lectionary for this Sunday in our churches, and we pull a few threads at the meaning of what it really is to have faith. But first, and as always, in our time together, we pause for a moment's prayer. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from ploughing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron and serve me while I eat and drink? Later on you may eat and drink'?" At first glance, our small little passage of scripture from St. Luke's Gospel today seems to be talking about two entirely different things. In fact, it took a while for me to actually try and get my head around what Jesus might be saying. It begins with the apostles asking for him to increase their faith, very humanly, I suppose. And then he seems to go off on a tangent, telling them about a servant working in the field and then coming back in again. And I'll remind us of what he's been saying when I get to that part in this small reflection today. Let's look first at the question that the apostles ask him. Increase our faith, they say. This gives us the understanding that they may have had a notion of faith as being relative to the power that they might hold. So in other words, they were probably thinking that the more faith they had, the more power they would have. But Jesus is dismantling all of that and saying, actually, if you just have one tiny drop of the right type of faith, then you have incredible power, the likes of which you don't really understand. I suppose you have the power to do the seemingly impossible. You see, if we are to operate an understanding of faith that relies on this increased capacity, everything that's bigger, and therefore power will follow with that, we're operating in a worldly fashion, aren't we? We're operating in feeding the ego, that understanding that power comes from all that is great and larger than life. And if we have been listening to the words of the Christ, as he presents to us an idea of the kingdom of heaven, then we'll understand that the exact opposite is always true. Not only is the last first, but he is actually saying this morning that the right type of faith does not feed the ego, does not rely on power and majesty. The power comes from the tiniest, smallest morsel of a faith that is humble and a faith that is built on obedience to God. That's where the parable of the servants comes in. At least I think it is. What Jesus is trying to say is that if you look at a servant, they are paid to do a certain thing. And you wouldn't necessarily ask them to sit at the table with you after their day's work. You'd expect them to continue working. It's the understanding. And from this understanding, we cultivate a different way of being when it comes to God. We're not expecting anything great and powerful and recognition for all our fine works, because that feeds the ego. What we are doing is actually making ourselves humble and saying to God, God, we are your servants, and whatever is your will, we will obey. And that takes an awful lot of perseverance, an awful lot of prayer, an awful lot of setting aside the other ways of the world that we operate and live within. Our ability to be able to give ourselves fully and in obedience to God means that we begin to change in here, in the heart space. It means that we begin to operate in that pure drop of faith that Jesus speaks about at the beginning of this week's scripture. One tiny drop of pure faith has immense power. I think we don't know the half of it. But it is a faith that comes from the place inside of ourselves that has given ourselves completely into the hands of God. That's what makes us his servants. If we put aside all the intentions and plans that we have for ourselves with regard to the world, and say, before I go anywhere or do anything or think anything, Father, I'll give this into your hands. every single thing that I am, every single thing that I do, I'm having the courage to place in your hands and say, what if? What if God is walking with me in every moment? What if anything that befalls my path is for my betterment, even the bad things that happen? That God is constantly growing me through these, that He is constantly with me through these, that He is teaching me and stretching me and bringing me. And that if I make myself His humble servant and obedient to His will, together we can do amazing things. Together we can grow that little pure drop of pure faith inside the soul of ourselves. You know that I've spent a considerable amount of time worrying about different things. A lot of them things I can't control, at times when I certainly can't control them. But of late I have to share with you that I have begun to place my life entirely into God's hands. It takes a while. It takes some getting used to, because all the old habits of power and control are there. Kind of like what the disciples were asking about, perhaps, or wondering about in the first part of our reading today. That human construct, the idea that power comes, even power with regard to faith, comes from an increase. But Jesus teaches us, actually, it comes from a decrease. It comes from a decrease in ourselves, in our preconceived notions of who we are, even in who we are through Christ, that we suddenly say, actually, I'm placing everything I am in your hands. That's obedience, that's humility, and that's trust. And can I tell you, as someone you know well now, who is a worrier and a bit of a controller, because I'm desperately trying to control things so that I don't fail. In the past couple of weeks, I have witnessed God's hand at work, not only within this parish, but within my own personal life and within the lives of those I care for. And I know instantly, I see you, God. I see Him. And every day that goes by, that I place my hands in His hand, and I say to Him, I just give you myself, I see miracles happening. The pure dot of faith comes from obedience, from submission to God, from the understanding that our work is for Him, not for ourselves, and from pure humility. And that humility comes from trusting with our entire hearts, because faith is an experience of the heart, not rational thought. Trusting with our whole hearts in His presence in our lives,